What's up guys, John here and welcome back to John Moon Studios. In this week's video we're going to be talking about the differences between buses, between Auxes, between VCAs, between groups, instrument tracks, audio tracks. We're going to explain the entire thing. That way when you open up your project you know how to organize your files and to make sure that you have the best workflow for your project. Again, workflow is super important and we want to make sure that we stay organized while we're doing our mixing and make sure that we have all the tools necessary at hand to be able to speed up our workflow and have quick turnaround times. So, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Alright, so the first thing we're going to talk about is just a basic audio channel. So the basic audio channel is for you to record mic instruments or even line instruments. So when you check your interface, you're going to see either a line input or a mic input, and you get to record your audio signal into an audio track. Right? Very simple to remember. Audio signal, audio track. So the way that you create an audio track in Logic is you can do Option Command A, that creates Option Command A, that creates another audio track, or you could simply just go up here to track and do new audio track. Now again, I prefer using shortcuts. That's what I do, so I recommend learning that to speed up your workflow. There's not really much to this. You can have either a stereo channel, but if you click these two rings here, you can have a mono signal too. So I recommend using a stereo channel, and if you want a mono, just click it out here. If you start with the mono track and press it to become stereo, for some reason it doesn't really respond that well, so I'd recommend doing it the opposite. So start with a stereo and then go into a mono track. So the second track we're going to talk about is the instrument track, right? And again, they're all labeled here in the mixer. So if I press X, you can pull that up, or right click in here. Again, shortcuts are the way to go. So I can do an instrument track. So the same way we pulled up the audio track with Option Command A, this time we're going to press Option Command S. And that's going to pull up an instance of an instrument track. So again, here I have my instrument track. Here I have my play instruments. So again, I just created an instrument track. So we have a MIDI keyboard. You can press on the keyboard and you can see these little keys here light up because I'm playing through my MIDI keyboard, and if I have some samples here, you'll be able to hear them. So this is how you create an instrument track. You can also go to track, you can go to software instruments here. Again, it is Option Command S for the shortcut. This is only for MIDI instruments. This is not for audio tracks, so you can't record audio on this. It's only sample libraries. So the next thing we're going to talk about is an aux track. So an aux track is pretty much a way to route your signal into an aux track, a different channel strip, but that does not affect your normal signal. So let's assume that we have our signal chain here, so I'm just going to put a Kramer tape just to have it there. But then let's say I have a reverb and I want to put some reverb in here. I'll just use the Logic stock reverb. If I use the reverb here, that means that now I have to control the wet and dry signal here, and ideally is not a good idea because you still want to have some kind of dry signal in your tracks. It's not really a good idea to put your reverb on an insert unless you're doing something very specialized like sound designing. But in this case, in order to maintain our dry signal, what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a send, right? And what we're doing is we're just replicating this signal into an aux track. So an aux track will automatically appear the moment I hit bus 1. There's our aux number 1. So the actual signal is coming from the audio. I am sending it to an aux track, right? You cannot record on this. This is only to hold your reverb. And then here you can adjust the amount of dry signal you want to send to this reverb. And now this channel strip, this fader, is what's going to control the amount of reverb that you want in the signal. All right, but if I turn it all the way down, I still preserve my dry signal here. So you just send as much as you want or as little as you want, and that way you don't have to use up your dry signal in order to create this reverb effect. This is the way that it's done, kind of like a standard, so I recommend doing it this way. Again, you'd only put it on an insert if you're doing something very specialized. So we talked about an aux track, and we're talking about buses right here. So this pretty much covers both of them. The bus is literally just means an aux track. So you're just, again, you're replicating the signal, you're busing it to a different track, and then this is your bus / aux track. Again, bus 1 has to match the input of the aux track has to match the send bus number that you send from your channel. If they don't match, then you won't hear the reverb coming into this channel. You will hear nothing. But if you do, you got to make sure you have your bus 1, and then you turn up your reverb, you crank up this little knob here, and then you send however much signal you want. So again, you have the option here in Logic to kind of disengage, seeing your aux track, disengage seeing your buses, your inputs, your audio tracks, whatever. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about groups. So let's assume you're working on a large project. So I'm going to go ahead and open up just a few more tracks for audio signals, right? So let's say this is a drum set. Let's do a basic drum set here. Kick, snare, hi-hat, overhead left, and overhead right. This is our basic drum kit, and I'm gonna go ahead and you can see it labeled here. So now I'm gonna go ahead and group this. Now what a group is nothing. It's basically you're moving one fader to control all faders, right? You're grouping these faders together. That way you only need to move one knob and not have to worry about moving separate knobs at the same time. So if you want to lower down the volume of the drum set, all you do is lower down one knob and it controls all of them. So if we open up our mixer, you see a subsection called group here. And again, if you're missing any of these names here, you can right click on an empty space up here on the channel strip and then go to channel strip components. Here you can open up if you're missing any of this. So let's say group is missing, like, oh no, I don't see group. You're going to go ahead and right click here, channel strip components, and your group, and you can go ahead and enable that. So now that we see our group, we're going to go ahead and group this all into one little group, right? So we're going to go ahead and press group here, group number 1. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same all across my drum set. And you can rename these groups by hitting here where it says name, double clicking, and let's say I put drums. So now it says group 1 drums. Simple. So now the idea behind the groups is, so let's say you want to turn down the entire drum set because you balanced it, it looks great. So you want to just move one fader to move all of them. It doesn't matter which one you move, but if you move it, you're going to see all of them move at the same time. So let's say you have, these faders jumbled up all over the place. So let me highlight all these really quick so you can get an idea. So I'm going to do no group. I'm going to put this, I'm going to move this one up here, move this one down here, over here, up here. And let's say this is our balance. We don't want to touch any of this. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight all these again, put group 1 drums. And now from here, let's say I want to turn down the drum set. All of them move at the same time, right? They maintain, whether you're going lower or higher, they will always maintain their distances from each other. So their distances and volume, you see, it doesn't matter whether I go all the way down, they'll go all the way down. But if I move back up to line level 0 0, then they're going to be in the same exact place where I left it. That's the important thing about groups. You can move all these faders at the same time without moving one because you have the perfect balance and you don't want to ruin that. So there's another way to group your sounds, but it's a little bit less ideal if you want to group, like let's say you want to do groups of groups. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's say you just want to do the drums and you're okay with just moving one fader with the drums and you're not going to group a group with a group. So like let's say I have a drum channel and then let's say I have a bass and I want to move both of those at the same time. we're going to talk about that later using VCAs. So let's say I just want to use the drum track and then everything else is separate from each other. I can just go ahead and highlight all of these, create a track stack, which is Shift Command D, just showing you where you can find it if you right click. So again, highlight all these tracks, Shift Command D. And now we're going to go ahead and create a folder stack. So you could use a summing stack, but just know that if you use a summing stack, you're going to use more CPU. And also, well, the advantage of using a summing stack is that you can actually EQ and do a lot of any processing you want on the main folder stack. So let's just see what that's about. We won't be using this one, but because again, all we're worried about is just moving one fader and then controlling everyone's volume. So here we have our summing stack. Again, you could use processing here, and that way, let's say you want to add a reverb to the entire drum set, you don't need to put bus 1, bus 1, bus 1, bus 1, bus 1. You could just put bus 1 here, send it to an aux track, right? So instead of putting bus 1 here, because it's only affecting the kick drum, you put the bus 1 here. You send some volume. Again, it'll create it for you here, but you send some volume here, and then here you have your aux track, right? So let's just go back. I'm just going to undo everything here. So now here we're back to square one. We're going to highlight these tracks, and again, all we're worried about is volume and, you know, muting and all those things. So we're going to go ahead and create a track stack. Again, Shift Command D, create a folder stack. Basic track stack that lets you mute, solo, and control volume from the main tracks. Select this option to organize your tracks. Create. And now notice that now your subtrack does not have insert, sends, EQ, the input. It has nothing. All it does is control your volume. Now, the cool thing is that now, again, look, it creates your groups here. It says you're in sub 1. But now you're controlling the volume with this fader here. This is going to be your volume for the drum volume. Now, the cool thing, I guess, about this, well, I wouldn't say cool because I like the other version better because you can see the faders moving. But the cool thing about it is that you can move these and your faders will stay in position. It's just another way of looking at it. You don't need to do it this way. You could do it the other way, or you could do it this way, however you feel comfortable. But this is another way of doing the same thing. So now let's go ahead and talk about VCAs and the advantages of VCAs over using over this not summing stack, the track stack, right? Just the track stack. So let's say we create. So let me actually get out of here. Let me create 3 more tracks. We're gonna call this bass DI. Again, this is I'm using common names here because bass, let's say bass, and you used I don't know, SM57 to mic your bass, and then we're going to use the bass, and then we're going to do the RE20, right? Again, I'm just using real life instances of tracks that you probably name in a studio. So here we have our bass channels, there's 3, and then here we have our drum channels, which is 5. So the problem with using track stacks is, let's see, create track stack, folder, and then create track stack, folder. Cool. So now let's say you want to control one fader for both of these, because drum and bass usually go hand in hand, and you usually want to turn those down, up or down at the same time. So you can't really do that if you do a folder stack, because again, you're just moving just the drum and just the bass. It's not fun, right? We want to see these faders moving together. So I'm going to go ahead and undo all that. What we're going to do is we're actually going to group them into VCAs. Okay, so what a VCA is a voltage control amplifier. And this name comes from analog consoles, right? And pretty much what it is you're grouping a bunch of tracks into one fader. That way, when you move that one fader, you're controlling the volume of everything, okay? So let's say we group this into group 1, right? This is drums. right? And now let's say we're going to do a second group for the bass. And I'm going to rename this again here in your, again, you can open this up by pressing I or pressing this up here. Again, shortcuts. And you can name this bass guitar. Okay, so this is your bass guitar. These are your drums. Now what we could do is we can create a voltage control amplifier, right? So we're going to go ahead and highlight these and create a new VCA. Boom. Now you're going to see VCA down here. So think of the group inside of a group. Very simple, right? So now what's the idea behind this? Well, the idea is that now that I made this VCA, let's say I'm going to call this drum slash bass. Oops. Drum slash bass, right? And now I have this group here. So let's say I just want to move the drum channel. Again, they're in a group. I can move it just on their own. But let's say I want to move the bass channel. Again, I can move it because they are on their own. But let's say I want to move both of them at the same time. Well, since these are in a group on their own, this is in a group on their own, I need to make sure that this VCA is also on drum and bass. Because now when I move this voltage control amplifier, it's going to control the volume of not just, drums or bass. It's going to control the volume of both of them. Okay, this is a very good way to, again, we're nesting, we're putting tracks so that it's easier to move. It's easier to move one fader than to move 8 faders. So with this fader here, you're able to control the volume of all of these instruments together. But let's say, again, in this you want to just move the bass, then you go to the bass knob and you can move one of them. You see? And it only moves the bass. And here you can go to the drums and you can move it, turn it up. But then at the end of the day, if you want to move both of them at the same time, you're going to use this VCA, voltage control amplifier. This is the advantage of using a VCA because, again, you're just grouping on top of a group. That's all you're really doing. You're nesting, moving one fader instead of 8. So that's pretty much the idea behind a VCA. That's how you'd probably use it in a real world kind of setting, this industry standard setting on a console. You would do it on the console. So you would set that up on the console and just kind of, consoles come with like 8 VCAs already in the master center, the master piece of the console where you have your transport function. So they're going to have like 8 VCAs where you could just group all of your instruments together. You can even create a submix of your entire track and then route it to a VCA. And then have that, instead of moving your master channel, you leave that alone, and you could just control your entire mix with this fader here, this one fader. That's the power behind VCA. So there we pretty much have it. We talked about our audio tracks, our instrument tracks, aux, buses, VCA, and those are pretty much the ones that you're going to be using. Input and output, we really don't need to worry about those because it really doesn't do much. The output is just your master track, and again, they also have this master fader already for you here, but again, I never touch these. I never touch output or master, so I really don't worry about them. And then you have the input, and if you use any MIDI tracks, you can go ahead and use the MIDI tracks. So that's all the information for this video. If you have any questions, please drop your comments down below and I'll get to them as soon as possible. Also, if you like this video, hit the thumbs up, press the subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss my next video, and don't forget to share with your musician friends. I'll catch you guys later.